Let's talk about consciousness. Do people feel pain? You probably want to say, obviously yes, but how do you know that? If you harm people, they have certain responses. For example, they might move a certain way, scream. Those responses often seem to us like those people are indeed in pain. But can we really trust those responses? You can make a toy that also responds to certain things as if it's in pain, but we probably wouldn't think this toy is in pain. So, in other words, how can we know that people feel things? Now, you might be thinking the toy is not complex enough to feel things. But guess what? Even a pile of sand is complex. It requires entire fields of science to understand the mechanism of ordinary objects. Now, you might be thinking, can't science figure this out? For example, there is neuroscience. Doesn't that help us? The answer is no. Science helps us study behavior. But we are talking about feeling things, not about behavior. The toy I mentioned earlier also has a certain behavior. That doesn't mean the toy is actually feeling anything. If you study the brain, you'd be able to understand the behavior of the brain. You can do the same with the toy I mentioned, studying how it's wired. But it doesn't tell you about whether or not there is any feeling. In science and neuroscience, any kind of feeling discussed is behavior. Behavior is not actual feeling necessarily. It's just a certain mechanism that can have expressions. For example, when you scream, you might be expressing pain. A certain part of your brain is signaling that you need to scream. Just like a toy that is making a scream sound effect, expressing pain that is not really there. That is a behavior of your body and your brain. In the same way, the toy has certain wires that tell it to scream in pain. You might be saying that the brain has brain states, so it's not just a sound effect. Think about a toy with different states, some of which cause it to scream. So, whenever you see people behaving in certain ways, like screaming in pain, it doesn't mean they actually feel it. Of course, it's possible that people do feel things. Problem is, we can't gather any evidence of those feelings. Your instinct might tell you now, but I do feel. I'm feeling them right now. I'm experiencing my own body. But you, in fact, cannot be certain about your own experiences either. The reason that your brain says it has personal experiences has nothing to do with personal experiences. Your brain says all this in the same way that my computer once told me, "Welcome to Windows XP." Your brain claims to feel stuff because it was programmed to say it. It's just a biological and cultural process. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just you saying it is not really special. If someone makes a toy that says, "I have personal experiences," we don't need experiences to explain why the toy is saying that. And you just might be that toy. A toy that is programmed in a way that it believes it is feeling things. Here are some pushbacks against this line of argument. Some people will say, if our brain is tricking itself into believing it feels things, isn't that confusion an experience? Isn't believing that we have an experience in itself? The answer is again, not necessarily. The confusion we talk about here is behavior. It might also be an experience, but we don't know that. For example, you can trick a homing missile by sending it false signals. That doesn't make the homing missile feel confusion. It is just a mechanism. Now imagine this scenario. We connect a person to a VR headset, simulating his leg chopped off visually. But also, we are sending his brain signals that tells his brain that his leg is being chopped off. Essentially, this person's brain thinks in every way possible that the leg is being chopped off. Now, let's suppose this person is really experiencing things. Is this the same experience as having his leg really chopped off? Yes. So some people will try to conclude that even without feeling anything, us believing pain exists is the same as pain existing. But this conclusion requires us to assume that experience exists in the first place. The reason that in the thought experiment the real and fake scenario are meaningful to the argument is because experience exists in the first place in that hypothetical. So the experience in that hypothetical is the same. In reality, if experience doesn't even exist, then us reacting to supposed pain is just a performance. Some people will claim, but we often are impacted and change our behavior because we feel things. Another version of this argument is, if you don't feel pain, why don't you touch a hot stove? The answer is simple. Us changing some aspects of our behavior based on input is just still part of our behavior. You can build a robot, for example, that moves slower every time you press on a button. So that robot would change its behavior in response to certain stimulus. That doesn't mean the robot feels something when you press the button. There's just some mechanism inside it that responds to this button. In the same way, people will have brain states that are affected by stimulus or by interpretations of sound. Perhaps I would avoid touching hot stoves because my brain is programmed in such a way that whenever it receives this type of signal, it avoids things that trigger that signal. So perhaps we just don't feel any